You ever heard somebody call Brian Kelly of LSU Big Game Brian? No, you haven't. There's a reason for that. LSU has faltered time after time after time during Brian Kelly's somewhat short tenure with the Tigers. But this goes back to his time at Notre Dame. This goes back to his time at Cincinnati. It just feels like time after time after time, when the bright lights come on, Brian Kelly hasn't gotten the job done. And eventually the blame can't be put on anybody else. Like, you run out of scapegoats. And so I wonder if this is the beginning of the end of Brian Kelly's tenure at LSU, because it is not a match made in heaven. It certainly doesn't appear as if LSU fans have embraced Brian Kelly as their head coach. And I don't know that he necessarily believes that he's the perfect person for that job. And if you were to inject some truth serum into him, I would bet you good money that he would have not good things to say about the fan base. I don't get the impression that he thinks that they are, the world's finest people. I don't get that impression that he's the kind of guy who meshes well with folks in the Bayou. But when you look at his first game at LSU, they lost to Florida State by 1 point. Later that season, they got their butts kicked by Tennessee, got beat down by Texas A&M. They did beat Alabama, but then they lost to Georgia in the SEC championship game, and then played in the Citrus Bowl and beat the hell out of a bad Purdue team. During his second season, lost to Florida State to start the season, lost a shootout to Ole Miss, lost to Alabama, won a ReliaQuest Bowl against a not great Wisconsin team. In 2024, first game of the season, lost a close game to USC, lost to Texas A&M 2 weeks ago, got their tails whipped, lost to Alabama at home last night. It just they beat Ole Miss a few weeks ago. And I don't think Ole Miss is all that great. And that's a different discussion. And I'm sure Kirby Smart didn't want to have that discussion today. But I don't think Ole Miss is a juggernaut or a big win by any stretch of the imagination. But LSU did beat them. But if you're consistently losing to the Florida States and Alabamas and Texas A&Ms and the Georgias of the world, and you're already kind of on a slightly thinner ice than other coaches would be because you don't necessarily mesh well with or jive with the university, athletic director, athletic department, fan base, I wonder how much of a leash Brian Kelly has. Now, their final 3 games of the season should be, on paper, relatively easy. At Florida, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma. So they're looking a 9-3 season in the face, which at, 85% of schools, a 9-3 season is like, hell yeah, we had a great year. But LSU is not 85% of college football programs. LSU views themselves, and justifiably so, by the way. This isn't a trashing them. This isn't looking down upon them condescendingly. LSU believes they are in the top 1% of college football programs. And so 9-3 doesn't cut it, especially when you get beat the way they did at home to Alabama. And it's a somewhat, they got beat by 2 touchdowns last year against Alabama. When he was at Notre Dame, they famously got beat by a lot in the national championship game. Now, some of that is when you lose to a better team, I don't sit here and hold that against people. I know there are Ohio State fans that will say, Ryan Day lost the national championship game to Alabama. Yeah, Alabama was better than them. The idea that a football coach lost a game when the other team was somewhat significantly better than them is not some, indictment on them or their coaching ability. But the reason Brian Kelly left Notre Dame to become the head coach at LSU was because that path to a title at LSU was supposed to be easier. It was supposed to be a significantly easier path, that it was much more likely that he was going to win a title at LSU than at Notre Dame. And yet, during his time with LSU, their AP poll finishes have been 16-12. And they're probably headed for another season where they finish in that 14-18 range. While Notre Dame is on the cusp of making the college football playoff if they don't stub their toe again, which isn't a foregone conclusion by any stretch of the imagination. Now, Brian Kelly produces. He had what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years in a row, or 7 years total, and 2, 3, 4, 5 years in a row of double-digit wins at Notre Dame. He won double digits 3 times in 4 years at Cincinnati. He won double digits 2 years in a row at LSU. I'm not here saying that Brian Kelly is not a very good football coach. I'm saying the situation that he's in isn't great when you're producing results that are just okay in the eyes of the LSU fan base, which to them finishing 16th or 12th should be viewed as just okay. And you are already 6-3, where you're going to finish between 14 and 18. People are going to start asking questions about whether you're the right guy for the job, because 10-4 and 10-3, and probably 10-3 when they beat an overmatched Big Ten team in the Citrus Bowl, is good, but good is not good enough at some programs, and LSU is one of those programs. So I just wonder how much the heat gets turned up on Brian Kelly, what those conversations are and what those expectations continue to be, because it's obvious that at that program, it's national championship or bust. Now, there is a portion of the fan base that is national championship or bust every year, but I think somewhat a lot of those fans are somewhat reasonable. Like when Brian Kelly got here, it was because we needed improvement. We needed to jump back up to the top of the college football world, and that's not going to happen overnight. But after, in year number 3, 3/4 of the way through the season, and you got 3 losses, those questions are going to start popping up, where you lost 4 games, you lost 3 games, you lost 3 games. Are you going to be able to get us over the hump of where we want to go? That's the question from LSU fans, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The longer that those questions persist, the more likely it is that you get the answer you don't want. The more likely it is that the answer you want is, yes, Brian Kelly is the guy who's going to take us to the promised land. But the longer you have to ask it, the more likely it is that that is not the case. And so I wonder if that snowball continues to roll downhill and get bigger and bigger and bigger, or if they beat the tar out of their last 3 opponents and start to squash that. It's Sunday. So let's look at our Sunday Stiff Arm Trophy update. This is what my Heisman ballot would look like today if I had one and if it was due today. I would still vote for Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty. The gap has closed between he and Dillon Gabriel. And I don't, for the record, I'm very much a being the quarterback of the best team in the country does not just inherently make you a Heisman Trophy candidate, right? Like, I'm very much aware, however, that is how it works more often than not. Is that, and I've made this argument before, and I'll make it again. Stetson Bennett was a Heisman Trophy finalist because he happened to be the head or the quarterback at Georgia at the right time. So that to me is kind of part and parcel of like, hey, being the quarterback of the number 1 team in the country sure helps your Heisman Trophy candidacy. But I would still vote for Ashton Jeanty. He hasn't done, in my opinion, enough to lose that spot. He rushed for 209 yards and 3 touchdowns on Saturday. Dillon Gabriel is also playing really well. Cam Ward has been at my number 3. He did not have a great Saturday. We didn't talk about Miami, but the Hurricanes lost a game that I don't think anybody thought that they were going to get through the season unscathed. And I kind of like the college football playoff situation now because if Miami had lost yesterday, like, well, we're done talking about the Canes. No more talk. We don't care about them. They are from a bygone era. Well, now they can afford to lose a game, and they're still in the hunt for the playoff. And I think overall it's probably a good thing. But Cam Ward would be number 3 on my list. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.